Diddy got indicted. Big charges coming his way. Some people are wondering what this is all about. How was this guy allowed to exist and be basically the kingpin for 30 years, and then all of a sudden they're like, we're just going to get you on sex trafficking and kidnapping and slavery charges and so on and so forth. We'll take a look at this indictment because it's a juicy one, but he has been indicted. He was in court today. You can see some photographs of what's happening. He was arrested on Monday night at the Park Hyatt Hotel in Midtown Manhattan. He was staying there, and then he got arrested, was in court this morning. He's got a contentious relationship, says Aubrey O'Day. During the filmmaking, says, I never thought I'd see this day. But what happened was Homeland Security swooped in on Monday evening, took him into custody. And then on Tuesday, he was in court. His lawyer told TMZ, Sean Diddy Combs is a music icon, self-made entrepreneur, family man, and so on. And he's been working to uplift the black community. He's an imperfect person, but he's not a criminal. 30 minutes before the arrest, he was outside the hotel chatting with fans. Hours before the arrest, he was walking with his son, King Combs, on the streets of New York. And this has a weird vibe to it. This has an Epstein rhyme. It feels like an Epstein rhyme, right? People are useful until they're not useful anymore, and then suddenly they get indicted. So here's what the indictment looks like. United States of America versus Sean Combs, AKA Puff Daddy, in the house. P. Diddy and PD and Love all in the house. Sean Combs indicted for diddying illegally. Now, sealed indictment has now been unsealed. You can see this is what it says. For decades, as we just said, for decades, this dude has been running around without any repercussions. The defendant abused, threatened, coerced women and others around him to fulfill his sexual desires and to protect his reputation and to conceal his conduct. So it might be an Epstein vibe. You might call it a Harvey Weinstein vibe, whatever it is. But they're allowed to exist until they're not allowed to exist. To do so, Combs relied on employees, resources, influence of his business empire. He created a criminal enterprise whose members and associates were engaged in multiple crimes: sex trafficking, forced labor, kidnapping, arson, bribery, and obstruction of justice. So they say that he operated his business in Manhattan and LA under various names: Bad Boy Entertainment, Combs Enterprises, Combs Global. Cool names. Enterprises and Global. It's like, cool, man, that's cool. Like we should do Watcher Global. That sounds cool. Now, at all times relevant to this indictment, he was engaged in a pattern of abuse towards women and other individuals persistently. The abuse was at times verbal, emotional, physical, and sexual. As part of this, Combs, Diddy, manipulated women to participate in highly orchestrated performances of sexual activities with male commercial sex workers. It's interesting. Now, at times, Combs and others acting in his direction made arrangements for women and commercial sex workers to fly to his location. Combs ensured the participation from the women by obtaining and distributing narcotics to them, controlling their careers, leveraging financial support, threatening to cut off the same, and using intimidation and violence. So it's like pornography, but it's like for him? Like he has women come, and then he has male pornographers come, and they do like private shows for him? All right. Physical abuse was recurrent and widely known. On numerous occasions from at least 2009 continuing for years, Combs assaulted women by striking, punching, dragging, throwing objects at them, kicking them. These assaults were at times witnessed by others, including one at an LA hotel, which was captured on video and later publicly reported, where Combs kicked, dragged, and threw a vase at a woman as she was attempting to leave, right? Nobody did anything or said anything about it. When a member of the hotel security staff intervened, which is their job, Combs attempted to bribe the staff member to shut them up. Now, Combs's violence was not, and I'm sure, maybe it worked, or they didn't say anything, but it worked. It extended to his employees, witnesses, and he abused a bunch of people. So then Combs used the business to facilitate and cover up for his commercial sex. Those employees, including security staff and other high-ranking supervisors, acted as Combs's intermediaries, and they facilitated this. Now, here's how the enterprise worked. there were members and associates that from at least 2008 until the date of filing this indictment that were engaging in all of this, all right? Trafficking, forced labor, interstate transportation for the purposes of prostitution, coercion, enticement to engage in narcotics, kidnapping, arson, bribery, and obstruction of justice. Now, Combs, including its leadership and a bunch of people, created an enterprise. The enterprise consisted of all these people, entities, and so on. Now, the enterprise was an ongoing organization who were operating for the purposes of Combs. And at all times, P. Diddy, Puff Daddy, was the leader of the Combs enterprise. Now, the enterprise, the whole purpose of this was to act as a recording studio and a record label. They also wanted to enhance the power and the reputation of Diddy. They wanted to enrich the Diddy people. They wanted to preserve and promote the Diddy enterprise. Now, other members engaged in unlawful acts. They enabled Combs to do all of this. They secured loyalty from people who were a part of this, and they tried to evade detection and prosecution of law enforcement through intimidation, manipulation, bribery, threats of retaliation, and so on. Now, among the means and methods by which Combs and other members did this include the following. Here we go. So Diddy and other members and associates of the Combs enterprise wielded the power and the prestige of Combs's business to lure females into his orbit under a pretense of romantic relationships, just like we saw with Weinstein and others. Combs then used force, threats of force, and coercion to cause victims to engage in sex acts with male commercial sex workers that Combs referred to, among other things, as freak-offs. So we'd have these little freak-offs. Gosh. Freak-offs were elaborate and produced sex performances that Combs arranged, directed, and masturbated during, and often electronically recorded. Weird. In arranging these freak-offs, Combs, with the assistance of members and associates, transported and caused commercial sex workers to be transported across state lines and internationally. Combs's freak-offs sometimes lasted multiple days and involved multiple commercial workers. And during these freak-offs, Combs distributed a variety of controlled substances to his victims, in part to keep them obedient and compliant. Sometimes even unknown to them, Combs kept videos he filmed of them engaging in acts with commercial workers. After freak-offs, Combs and victims typically received IV fluids, to recover from physical exertion and drug use. Now, members and associates, including high-ranking supervisors, often facilitated these freak-offs. Among other things, they booked hotel rooms. They stocked the hotel rooms in advance. They brought in baby oil, lubricant, linens, lighting. They cleaned the hotel rooms after the freak-offs to try to mitigate the room damage. Oh, gosh. It's a little early for this. Arranging for travel victims, commercial workers, and others. Resupplying Combs with requested supplies. Large sums of cash to Combs to pay the workers, and scheduling IVs. Now, during Combs's search of his residence, law enforcement seized various freak-off supplies. I'm telling you, the prosecutors just having a fun time writing freak-off as much as possible, including narcotics and more than 1,000 bottles of baby oil and lubricant. 1,000? Combs subjected victims to physical, emotional, and verbal abuse, causing them to engage in this stuff. He maintained control over them, among other things. He threatened them with physical violence. He promised career opportunities. He granted and threatened to withhold financial support. He tracked their whereabouts. He dictated their appearance, monitored their medical records, controlled their housing, gave them drugs. During this, he hit, kicked, threw objects at, dragged victims by their hair during these freak-offs in the middle of it. These assaults often resulted in injuries that took days or weeks to heal. Wild. Combs also threatened victims in their careers or livelihoods if they didn't participate in these freak shows. The victims believed that they could not refuse Combs's demand without risking their jobs or getting physically or emotionally abused. He often also used the sensitive, embarrassing, and incriminating recordings he made. Yes, that's the Epstein and Weinstein vibe. Oh, I've got you recorded, so if you come out, I'm just going to release this. So you must continue to do it. Members and associates of the enterprise also carried firearms. Combs also brandished firearms. In March, during the search of his residence, we found 3 AR-15s with defaced serial numbers. Oh, we know that there's another person who's in federal custody right now for having an obliterated serial number, and his name is Ryan Ruth, the attempted assassin of Trump. Members and associate of Combs' enterprise enabled Combs' control over victims by following his direction. They just did what he said. Members of the enterprise at times witnessed his violence, and they saw the injuries caused by Combs, but nobody did anything for 30 years. Instead, members and associates helped conceal the violence and the abuse by Combs, and they prevented victims from even leaving the locations like hotels or his residence. These occasions included instances where a victim was required to remain in hiding, sometimes several days, to recover from the injuries, so their face and their bruising would heal up. Members and associates of the enterprise also assisted Combs in locating and contacting the victims who tried to flee. And other employees witnessed his abuse. He threatened them with violence. He threw objects, he hit, he dragged, he choked, he shoved others. When Combs' authority or reputation was threatened with the negative publicity about him, then he attempted to bribe them. He forced them to stay silent. On phone calls, Combs and other members provided these victims with false narratives to try to conceal the crimes. So there was a conspiracy here. They say from at least 2008 through about the date of this filing, Sean Combs employed a bunch of people and committed a racketeering crime. Multiple acts of kidnapping, multiple acts of arson, multiple acts of bribery, many things indictable, all under various sections of the U.S. Code. In fact, he also distributed meth, cocaine, and many other drugs, ketamine and ecstasy. It was part of a conspiracy that he would do this. And so they say also, there's a special sentencing factor here. From at least 2009, including up, he would engage in interstate commerce to do this and force people to transport themselves to engage in interstate prostitution, commercial sex act. So as to count 2, sex trafficking is what he's been charged with. He aided and abetted and caused victim 1 to engage in commercial sex act and transport across state lines in count 3, transportation for prostitution. They want forfeiture of all interests that he got from committing these offenses, all money that he got from committing these offenses and any proceeds that are traceable from these things. And that's the game. Signed by Damian Williams, U.S. attorney from the Department of Justice, and it looks like this is coming out of the Southern District of New York. We spent a lot of time here in the Southern District of New York. It's where Ghislaine Maxwell was. In fact, I think Harvey Weinstein had a case here too. Very interesting indictment. And it's wild that this guy was allowed to exist in the public light for so long. Did anybody have any idea that he was a piece of work? Did he talk about it somewhere, like in his 15 albums ever? Were there any hints that maybe he was a bad dude? But he was allowed to exist for a very long time. And now all of a sudden, he's no longer in favor. I wonder what happened.